Is Chris. I am an alcoholic. Thank you so much for coming to Half Measures Avail Us Nothing. Thanks, Charlie. I am an alcoholic. The talk I want to give tonight is going to be on aspects of the illness. I believe that alcoholism is an illness, and I believe that it's a very, very misunderstood illness. It's much more aggressive than most of us give it credit for. A lot of times, if we have it, we are minimizing its impact on our lives. That's inherent in the illness. We all do it. We choose to not see just how damaging alcoholism is to our personal relationships, to our health, to our ability to function in this world. And there are a lot of aspects of alcoholism that are misunderstood and that we don't pay enough attention to. And I want to talk a little bit about that. But I also want to tell a little bit about my story because through my experience and the things that I went through and the things that I suffered from, that's a good barometer of what alcoholism looks like sometimes. My first drink happened when I was about 12 years old. I had decided with a couple of my friends that we were going to go back to my house and we were going to get drunk. This was a really cool thing to do. We thought, this would be very impressive, at the smoking area the next day at school. So that's what we did. We went back to my house, and I hadn't experienced alcohol yet. There wasn't a lot of drinking that went on in my family, so I didn't really know how to do it. So the only thing I knew about alcohol was what I'd seen in John Wayne movies. John Wayne would bust through the saloon door. He'd go up to the bar and he'd say, "Bartender, whiskey." The bartender would pour out a big water glass of whiskey. He'd drink it down. He'd grab the bottle and he'd go back to the table to finish the bottle. So that's about all I knew about drinking hard liquor. So the two guys I was with, we cut school, and the first thing I did was brought this bottle of Four Roses whiskey down from the liquor cabinet, and I poured out 3 big water glasses of Four Roses whiskey. Now, this is not how you drink Canadian whiskey, warm in a big water glass, but I didn't know that. I want to explain a little bit about what happened to the two guys that I was drinking with, because they never became alcoholic. As far as I know, they never became problem drinkers in their life. They were normal. They had a normal reaction to alcohol. And what that reaction was they had about 2/3 of the glass of their whiskey, and they'd had enough. And I think we've all drank with people like that, right? They have enough on you. You really want to get going, and they're like, "No, thanks. I've got to go home for dinner." It's like, are you crazy? It's only 10 o'clock. Let's go to New York City. This is the way I drank. So they had it. They had the 2/3 of the glass, and they sat back and they watched the show. And what happened was, I drank my glass, the rest of their glasses, and the rest of the bottle. What happens with alcoholism is it can happen over time, or it can happen the first time you drink. With me, it happened the first time I drank. What happened was I got an actual craving to have more alcohol. As I started drinking this alcohol, I had a craving to drink more. Now, that didn't happen to these other two guys. These other two guys just drank and they'd had enough, and they relaxed and they laid back. But I wanted to drink more, and I got completely drunk. I went into a blackout. I woke up in a field about 6 hours later, and I couldn't remember what I had done, and I was unbelievably sick. Now being sick like that, if it was anything but that alcohol, I never would have gone near it again. If it was a type of fish or a type of vegetable or something that made me sick like that, I never would have gone near it again because I was so ill. But there was an aspect to this alcohol that was very attractive to me. And I'll tell you basically what happened. Up until that point, I was a very reserved kind of a kid. I had a lot of like social anxiety. There were periods of time where I was really, really attached to whatever perception I thought you had of me was. I was always trying to maintain a kind of persona where people would think I was cool and wouldn't think I was lame. It was like, would be traumatic to me to do something embarrassing or stupid. So I was always worried about what you were thinking about me. And I never felt right. I never felt like I was in the right place at the right time with the right people. There was just a lot of things I just didn't like. You know, I felt more comfortable like by myself with my stuff really than I did, you know, out in the world. And, you know, I just had a lot of trouble dealing. When I started drinking that alcohol, somewhere into the second drink, a feeling came over me that got rid of all that negative emotion that I'd been carrying around my whole life. It just stripped it away. And all of a sudden, you know, I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't anxious anymore. Like I wasn't worried about what you thought about me. You know, you'd be lucky to hang out with me is kind of what I was thinking. You know, I wasn't worried about anything. I was larger than life, and I was funny, and I had no fear. And that was the first time that I can remember that I wasn't burdened with self. And I remembered that. I might have gotten really sick. You know how you get sick the first time you drink and you're like, for like 2 days, you're horizontal, puking into a waste paper basket. I mean, you know, I was sick. But slowly, the pain of that hangover kind of just receded in my mind. But I never forgot what alcohol did for me. If you're alcoholic, you know what I'm talking about. Alcohol does something for and to you that it does not do to a non-alcoholic. The normal reaction to booze is, you know, get a little lightheaded, get a little, you know, a little feeling, you know, a little nauseous, you know, a little out of control. That is not what happened to me. I'll explain one incident in my childhood that I was just haunted by. So, do you have like barn dancing or square dancing down here? Like when you're in school? Okay, like, well, here I am. I'm like in 7th grade or something, and what they do is in a gymnasium like this, they fill the gymnasium up with the gym classes. And they line all the girls up on one side and all the boys on the other, and they blow a whistle, and you're supposed to run across the gym and ask a girl to be your square dance partner, okay? Like, this was like traumatic for me, okay? I mean, you know, I'm thinking that therapists are still making money on this. They don't know the damage that they were doing to pre-alcoholics who hadn't experienced booze yet, you know? Like, because you just can't do that to somebody who's an alcoholic and who hasn't drank yet. And when I drank that Four Roses whiskey, there were dancing lessons in that bottle. You know what I'm saying? I'll dance with you, and if you're, you know, maybe you'll be lucky, and I'll ask you again later. You know, it was like a whole shift in my perception and in the way that I thought about my environment. And I started to become preoccupied with alcohol at this point in time because it did that for me. It was the anti-Chris potion I'd been looking for my whole life. Finally, I feel like all of you look like you feel all the time. I always thought there was something wrong with me. So I start to decide when to drink. Now, I knew never to go near Four Roses again, but I knew that alcohol was an answer. Alcohol was a solution to a problem I had emotionally and spiritually. And I started to figure out where to drink, who to drink with, how to get the booze. I'm 12, so drinking age was 21, so it wasn't easy. And I started to drink the kid drinks like the Boone's Farm apple wine and Strawberry Hill and the Ripple and the Blackberry Brandy. I started to go after that kind of stuff, Southern Comfort, all that stuff. And I started to hang out with the people who drank. And very, very early on in my life, the preoccupation with alcohol became paramount. It took precedence over other things that would have been in my best interest to participate in. I come from a very smart family. Both my brother and sister are college professor PhDs. My mother and father were Phi Beta Kappa, really great college, just intellectuals and really, really well educated. And by the first year of high school, I was failing everything. Okay. I mean, my family had never seen something like that. And one person after another would come up to me and say, you've got such potential. If only you would apply yourself. Has anybody in here ever been told they have potential? Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous, if you've been told that. Because, I had a lot of potential, but I wasn't interested. One of the things I started to do in high school was take Wednesday off. It was just, I saw it as onerous to have to go to school 5 days in a row. It was just, are you kidding me? So I would break the week up by taking Wednesday off. And this doesn't do your GPA much good, let me tell you. By the end of the school, I had graduated second stupidest kid in the graduating class. I mean, it really takes something to do that. But it wasn't because I was dumb. It was because I was putting all of my attention and efforts into partying. I didn't just do alcohol. I started drinking in 68, 69. Got very heavy into it in the early 70s, and there was a lot of other, there was a lot of other substances out there that you could partake of at this point in time, right? I smoked so much pot, forget it. It was ridiculous. And if you had a pill in your hand, I'd eat it and ask you what it was later. I mean, what? By the way, what was that? It didn't matter. I was a garbage head by this time. I remember incidences that would happen. I would allow myself to be over medicated. This one time, it was the Quaalude epidemic of 1972 in Basking Ridge, New Jersey. And what happened was a friend of mine had a big sack. You remember the Roar 714s? This guy had a big sack of Roar 714s, and he brings them to school. He had gotten them late the night before from his brother to sell at the school. And he hadn't done them. His brother hadn't done them. They got them really late. So he doesn't know much about them, but he's going to sell them. And he shows up at school with this big, huge plastic bag of these Quaaludes. And it's, we're gathering around the smoking section before school starts. And we're like, oh, you got Quaaludes? Well, great. How much are they? They're $2. Okay, well, how many do you take? And he goes, 3 or 4. Okay, so I'm serious. About 50 of us took like 3 or 4 Quaaludes before first period. There's some identification going on. If you don't know anything about Quaaludes, a Quaalude is like one Quaalude is like a 12-pack of Tall Boy malt liquors that hit you in 5 minutes. You know what I'm saying? And so taking 4 or 5 of this, really did a number on everyone's coordination. So the ambulance was in, back and forth all day long. Now, I get to a point where I'm walking down the hall trying to make it to third period, hanging on the lockers like this. And I figure, I got to get out of here. So I see the exit sign, right? So I'm gonna head for the woods. And I break through the doors and I get out to the woods, and there's all these people like holding on to trees out there. You know, it was really a bad scene. The next day in school, the kids came up to me and said, "Man, that was great yesterday." I'm like, "What?" I didn't realize it, but I had made a break right past the entire 400 wing. So about 200 kids got to watch me try to make it to the woods. And they said, "Chris, it was great, man. You heading to the woods. It took you like 5 minutes to go 100 yards." You know, and I thought I was moving, you know what I mean? Oh. There's another time I got involved a little bit with LSD. I mean, why? I have no clue. I mean, I just do anything, and because I didn't like being in me. Sobriety was untenable for me. I mean, it's that way for a lot of us. And look, if you can't find a way for sobriety to be tenable, you're not going to stay sober. That's really what we're here to talk about this week. The things that you need to do so that sobriety is not only tenable, it's enjoyable. Because that's the key. That's absolutely the key. But sobriety was untenable for me. So, I remember this one time I'm at a concert in New York City, and we go into the bathroom to buy drugs, and somebody was selling LSD. So that's what we bought. Whatever it was, we would have bought it. And so we eat this LSD, and like 10 minutes later, we're not high, so we think we got ripped off. So we go back and we buy more, and then 10 minutes later, we're still not. So we go back in. Well, by the last song of the concert, it's like Disney World, I mean, we're out of our minds, and we all leave the concert, and we climb in the van, and we're all heading from New York City back into New Jersey. Has anybody been through the Lincoln Tunnel? Do you know what that's like? There's like 10 lanes, and they all go down into 2 lanes, and then you go into the tunnel. Well, we're heading down toward the tunnel, and we're sitting in the van, and somebody goes, "Hey, man, we'll never fit," And we all move to the front of the van, and we're like, "He's right. It's a mouse hole." So we back out, people honking. It takes us like 45 minutes. We took the bridge. I mean, things like this were happening to me on a weekly, if not daily basis. I mean, real unmanageability. Now, the milkman would have known I was in real trouble. But if you would have come up to me and you would have said, "Chris, your drinking and drugging is an issue," I'd have been, "Man, it may be an issue to you, dude, but I'm having a good time." I mean, you can't recognize how much trouble you're in when you're caught up in this. Every once in a while, the clouds of delusion and denial will part, and you'll be able to get a clear picture of how much trouble you're in. A lot of times, that's when we sign ourselves into treatment or go to the halfway house or struggle into AA or NA. That's basically the time when we reach out, and that's usually when we're really critical. We're really far gone by that time. Listen, this is the absolute truth. Addictive illness is the #1 health threat in America. If you put heart disease and cancer together, they still wouldn't come close to the numbers of people that suffer from addictive illness. It's the #1 health threat in the country. It just is. That's how many people are affected. And most of those people don't realize how much trouble they're in. That's one of the aspects of the illness. It's one of the reasons why we lose so many people. Another aspect of the illness is, okay, you've recognized you're in trouble. I think I'll stop. Not knowing how much trouble you're in, sometimes you really think you've got this thing under control. That all you really need to do is make a decision not to drink or not to use. There's a lot of people who abuse alcohol. There's a lot of people who abuse drugs who can stop or moderate if they make that decision to. But the people who are the real drug addicts or the real alcoholics can't. And what happens is we get caught up in a cycle of drinking or drugging that we can't extricate ourselves from. We can't just say, all right, I'm never doing that again. How many of us have said that? I am never going to drink again, and you end up drunk, right? In usually a very short period of time. What is that? What is that inability to make a decision and stick to it? A lot of times our ego will want to take control of the whole situation and say, well, I'm changing my mind. Well, it's insane to change your mind, okay? If drugs and alcohol are doing what they do to us, it's insane to keep putting them in our body, yet we do, time after time after time after time. And we try to figure out how to deal with that. You know, how do you deal with that when that happens? Well, she left, or she stayed, or whatever reason that you come up with. But none of them make any sense when you look at just how devastating the drugs or the drinking, how it affects your life. And you don't even have a complete picture of it. You see the external damage, but there's spiritual and internal damage that's even worse sometimes than the external problems. The external problems can usually be straightened out. The internal problems take a whole hell of a lot of work. Again, that's what we're here to talk about. Now, the treatment for addictive illness or alcoholism is an unorthodox treatment. In the last couple of years, I've started to work with professionals in the fields of addictive illness treatment. I mean, I am working with and friends with some of the top people in this field, the people who own the rehab chains, the clinicians, the people who are writing the criteria for the textbooks on addiction, and the people that work in Washington, D.C. with, the drug and alcohol czars. I know these people, and I've learned a lot about treatment processes, and I've learned a lot about clinical assessments, and I've learned a lot about what the experts know and do who work with us. They break us into two different categories, basically. Where the book Alcoholics Anonymous says, we hope we explained the difference between the heavy drinker and the real alcoholic. The professionals basically use drug abuser, drug dependent, alcohol abuser, alcohol dependent. Now, the difference between these two classifications are basically that a drug abuser or an alcohol abuser is somebody, when they use it, they get into trouble. They can get DUIs, they can get arrested, whatever. That's a problem. But the people who are drug or alcohol dependent, that's a whole nother level of problems. Because what that means is they are dependent on the alcohol or the drugs. To be able to deal with life, they are dependent on it. And it's very, very difficult to break that dependence. The American Medical Society describes alcoholism as drug addiction. This is in the definition of alcoholism and drug addiction. Chronically relapsing condition. So what the doctors and the experts believe is, if we have alcoholism or if we have drug addiction, we are caught up in a chronically relapsing disease. We are going to chronically relapse. Most of us are going to chronically relapse until it kills us. This is what they've seen for the people who are alcohol or drug dependent. The people who are alcohol or drug abusers sometimes get one last DUI and say, you know what, I am never going to do this again. And they're fine. Most of the time, the people that show up at workshops like this with people like Charlie, Katie, and I, they've crossed that line. They've crossed that line into dependence, or the way the book Alcoholics Anonymous describes it is they're real alcoholics. They've lost the power, choice, and control in drink. They can't make a decision to not drink or not drug and have that be effective. That is not a defense. That decision not to use. It's not an adequate defense. We end up drunk or high one more time. Now, there's a lot of characteristics that alcoholics have, and pretty much they're pretty much universal. It talks about the spiritual unmanageability, the emotional unmanageability. It talks about our personal relationships. I want to talk a little bit about the personal relationships that I had back when I was drinking. I started off with some good friends. When you're young and you grow up in a neighborhood, you kind of hang out with the neighborhood kids. And some of these kids were good kids. I mean, they did well in school. They played sports. They were in the marching band. They went off to college. They did some really good things. As I started to drink, as I started to drug, what happened was I made an unconscious choice, because I don't think I really thought about this, but I made an unconscious choice to move away from the people who were living positive lifestyles to the people who were drinking and using. It was just more comfortable for me to be with the people that did things like I did, that drank a lot of booze and did a lot of drugs. So what happened was I moved away from people who were living healthy lifestyles to people that were living really bad lifestyles. Now, this affects your personal relationships, because I got to tell you, toward the end of my drinking, I had friends, the only friends left, didn't even have names. They were like Green Man and Weezer, and there was this guy I hung out with called Rat, and he spelled his name with 2 T's. These were the guys I was hanging out with. You never even knew who they really were. I mean, that's who these people were. And I felt comfortable with them. If there was somebody with a sane and sound perspective from the outside looking at this, they would be saying, what are you doing hanging around these people? They're going to be in prison most of their life. What does it matter? You come from a good family. And again, I didn't see the deterioration. So much of the damage that happens because of alcoholism or drug addiction, but not as much, happens slowly over the course of time. And it's imperceptible on a day-to-day basis. You slip a little bit each day. And over any considerable period of time, you've gotten a whole lot worse. You never get better. There may be short bursts of trying to clean up and starting to exercise and going back to school, but you end up shooting yourself in the foot with it somewhere, because you just can't maintain that positive trajectory. So my personal relationships were really bad. This doesn't make me alcoholic, because I don't think the consequences of drinking make you alcoholic. I think what makes you alcoholic is the alcoholism that causes you to drink. But some of the external things that I went through is I started to crash a lot of cars. I had 3 DUIs, and I totaled about 9 cars in drunken blackouts. I come from a period of time where friends let friends drive drunk. That's just the way it was. You'd walk to the party, get really drunk, and then go home and get the keys. That's just what we did. There was no designated driver. You know what there was? Give me my keys back. Nobody's taking my keys. That's what it was. And so I crashed a lot of cars. I'll tell you the first DUI and the last DUI, and that'll kind of give you the picture. And I don't want you to identify with the accidents or the DUIs. Identify with the thinking that can go on with this kind of a thing. Because here I am. I'm out at this bar out in the country, and I'm with some friends. And we went out there because there were some people and there was a good band. And the last thing I really remember is chugging pitchers of beer. Now, this is not social drinking when you're chugging a pitcher of beer, and see how many you can chug. That is not social drinking, but that's what I was doing. And the next thing I know, I'm in my car and I'm driving home. And I hit some ice, the car spins around backwards and goes into a bridge abutment. So about 40 miles an hour, I hit a bridge abutment going backwards. And it throws me through the seat and out the back window. Now, I come to and I'm laying on the trunk of the car looking up at the stars. My legs are still in the car, you know, and I'm like, whoa, this is probably not good. And I'm really drunk. Now, I just toasted this car, but it's still running. Okay, so it's like winter time, and the lakes are frozen, and I decide, you know what I'm going to do? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go home. I mean, have you ever had that homing instinct? You know, gotta go home. You know, so I get in the car and I start driving. Now the car has 3 flat tires. There's not a window left in the car. It's bent like a boomerang, and the drive shaft is slapping the frame. So I'm going down the road about 3 miles an hour, going back at the book of the bam, back at the book of the bam. And I drive right by a cop taking radar. Now I'll never forget. He's like, what? He doesn't even pull me over. He walks me over. You know, I'm going so slow. So he reaches through the window and he starts shaking me. Where'd you have that accident? And I'm like, what accident, officer? You know, there's glass in my hair. You know, what are you bothering me for? And he goes, where are you going? And I go, Basking Ridge. He goes, that's 24 miles. You don't have any tires. You know, why don't you leave me alone? You know. So DUI number 1. The last one I have, it's many years later. And my drinking has progressed to the point where rational people of sound mind don't want to be anywhere near me when I drink. I am now the Jekyll and Hyde lunatic. Okay, extremely violent, extremely touchy, could explode like a stick of dynamite at any second. I was just really unpredictable and just nuts. And this guy that I went to college with calls me up and says, hey, I'm back in town. You want to go for a drink? Yeah. And so I go for a drink with this guy. And a whole bunch of stuff happens. I end up in my car driving home. You know, it's about 10 miles from where I was to my house. And I get pulled over. Supposedly, I crossed the double yellow. You know how that is, right? Now, remember hazy recollections when you're drinking? Like you don't have the whole picture, but you remember bits and pieces of what happened that night. Now, I came to the next morning with a summons in my pocket for a DUI, and I was not happy about that. There had to be some injustice involved in this. And I remembered really nailing the ABCs in a sobriety test, right? So I'm thinking, I nailed those ABCs, so I'm going to get a lawyer. I'm going to fight this. Now, I get a lawyer. He's like $1,500 because it's a multiple DUI. First thing we do is we have to go up to the police station to view the sobriety test because they filmed it. Right? It's the first thing we have to do. Now, I was sure I did a good job with this, okay? I remember nailing the ABCs. Now, what happens is when we walk into the police station, we go in the room with the TV set. The cop comes in with the VHS tape, you know, with my name on it, and he's going like, he's laughing, and he hands it to the lawyer, and we plug it in and turn it on, and I'm horrified. Okay, has anybody in here ever seen yourself drunk on those videos? I'm telling you, you need counseling. You know, never ever witness your own DUI video. If you ever get that opportunity, don't take it. Anyway, it gets to the ABCs that I was so sure I did a great job on, and here's how I did them. A, B, can I have a cigarette? C. I mean, I was horrified. I'm looking at this going, oh my God. There's sections where they have me walking the line where literally my hands are against the wall. They're like, sir, could you please take your hands off of the wall and not hang on to the officer while you're walking? I mean, it was horrible. And at the end, this is the worst part. This whole time, the $1,500 lawyer is, you know, taking notes and very professional. It gets to the end and they go, okay, sir, we're about to turn off the camera now. Is there anything you'd like to add before we stop filming? And I look over at the camera and I go, "Ah!" like this, right? Oh my God. Now, the lawyer, who's been very, very, professional, just starts howling. He's going like, "Blah! I've never seen anything so stupid in my life. Oh, if you had any chance of beating this up until now, it's out the window. Blah!" Oh, it was horrible. We had to plea that one, and I walked for 4 years. Now, here's the thing. Should I have been on the road? No. In this day and age, do I believe that there should be stiff penalties for DUIs? Yes, I do. I drive on the road. My family drives on the road. People as drunk as I was should be stopped however you can stop them. But here's what I thought for years. I wanted to kill the cop that pulled me over and did that to me. I can't believe he ruined my life the way he ruined it. He was just doing his job. My perspective, when you're alcoholic, you have a perspective and you have a life system that's built on selfishness and self-centered fear. That's inherent. That's the way all alcoholics or all drug addicts are. You may think that that's not true in your case, but wait till you start writing some inventory. You're going to see in that inventory that you've probably never done anything for anybody without expecting something back in return. And you're always concerned about your position in the universe and rarely concerned about other people. I was concerned about what had happened to me. I've lost my license for 4 years. I never even considered what a danger I was on the road that night because my perspective was so alcoholic and so from a place of selfishness, self-centered fear, self-seeking. What happens in recovery, if the recovery is done right, if you find somebody who can really help you with the spiritual part of this illness, what happens is your dark perspective and selfish perspective will shift slowly with consistent meetings, working the steps with a sponsor, finding ways to be of help to other people. It'll shift from that selfish perspective over to a life system based in love, service, and compassion. I really see that as the spiritual awakening or the treatment for alcoholism. Now, that's an unorthodox treatment for an illness. When you go into a doctor and you've got a progressively fatal malady, he's going to give you chemo or pills or shots or something, and you're just going to hope that works and you're going to go on about your business. With addictive illness or alcoholism, we have to participate in the recovery process ourselves. And one of the problems is we lack the enthusiasm to do so. Think about this. Think about this from your own perspective. Think about it if you've had the honor and privilege of working with other people. Somebody will be brand new. This might be you or it might be somebody you're working with. Somebody might be brand new, walk into an AA meeting, somebody comes up to you, hey, you need some, I'll sponsor you, well, what's going on? Well, my life is a mess, the cops are after me, DUIs, I've been thrown out of my house, I lost my job, got no money, I'm down at the Salvation Army, everything's really bad. And, the sponsor will say something like, well, you have alcoholism, and alcoholism is a spiritual illness, and over any considerable period of time, things get worse, they don't get better. There's a recovery process for that, that will allow you to have the power manifest through you to keep you safe and protected from the next drink and help you rebuild your life. Are you interested in that? Yeah, really, yeah. Okay, well, I'd like to see you at the Thursday night meeting, and then this weekend I'll spend some time with you, and we'll get started on the big book. oh, wow, man, like Thursday's not really a good night, you know. I get my feet scraped on Thursday, and this weekend, you know, I'm going to Baltimore to see the Dead play. You know, I've had tickets for a while, like, so all this recovery stuff sounds really good, you know, but it's just a bad time. You're dying. You know, you should think about it this way. Let's say you went to the doctor and the doctor said, you've got pancreatic cancer. It's a really rare form of pancreatic cancer. You know, you've got who knows how much time you have, but it is going to kill you. It's going to be really ugly. You know, here's your bill. You know, and you say to the doctor, well, doctor, isn't there anything, you know, that can be done? And the doctor says, well, there's this experimental treatment in Seattle, Washington, where, you know, they found that rarely have they seen someone not recover who undergoes these 12 procedures. You know, most of the people have recovered and they're fine now. You know, what wouldn't you do to get to Seattle and participate in that experimental program? You would sell your house, you would quit your job, you'd rent your family out, you know, into servitude. I mean, you'd do anything to get out to Seattle to undergo that procedure because you know it's going to save your life. Now, with addictive illness, we don't have it black and white like that. We can't see that either we're consistent with meetings, work the steps with a sponsor, find ways to be of service, or we're going to die an alcoholic death. We don't see it black and white like that. Inherent in alcoholism or addictive illness is an almost utter inability to have a true perspective on how much trouble you're in. And correspondingly, to have that life-saving enthusiasm that you would have if you had another illness. And one of the things that's very, very difficult, one of the things that I think kills a lot of us is that lack of enthusiasm. Because if you don't have the enthusiasm, you don't participate. If you don't participate, you don't recover. So, you know, where do we get that enthusiasm? How do we get that enthusiasm? Some of the stuff that we're going to talk about this weekend is going to cover where we can help people stay enthusiastic, where we can help convince people of how much trouble they're in. But it's a hard job. It's a hard job. You know, I was on the phone coming from the airport with a sponsee of mine whose son is, you know, running all over the place, relapsing. You know, Charlie was on the phone with somebody, you know, just relapsed after 5 years. I mean, we see this all the time. We see people all the time who take their eye off of the ball. It happens so easily to us because this is an illness of minimization. It's an illness of lack of enthusiasm. And without being able to overcome that stuff, we don't stand a really good chance. One of the lines in the book is, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. I mean, that should say it all. We should be going, what path? What path? Where's the path? You know, but that's not what we do. We go into a meeting and we're like, oh man, this is pretty lame. You know, what are they talking about? You know, we're not even looking for the path. So that's a devastating characteristic of the illness, that lack of enthusiasm, lack of perspective. Another aspect of this illness is the overbearing emotional burden we allow ourselves to suffer from. We become incredibly attached to things that have happened in the past and incredibly anxious about things that are going to probably happen to us in the future. I just know tomorrow it's going to be terrible. And we suffer like crazy emotionally from this stuff. You know, I've seen, here's a statistic for you. This is a beaut. the alcoholic is 60 times more likely to take their own life in suicide than a non-alcoholic. Now that's incredible. I mean, but it's not really to me, because we bury in our area, not in my home group, but in my town area of meetings, we bury somebody every year that's been in the AA groups and hasn't plugged in. They've been showing up and sporadically showing up. They've not committed to sponsorship. They've not committed to working the steps. They're not helping other people. They're going to meetings hoping to suck some of the spirituality out of the room. And it doesn't work. And they get to the place of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And they kill themselves. And if they don't kill themselves, they drink or they use again, because that's really what relapse is. Relapse is really just kind of giving up. Now, that emotional, spiritual, psychic torture that we experience is part of the illness. We don't even recognize it as such. We think that, well, this is just the way I am. Life is miserable. You trudge along day after day, and then you die. And you just have this dark perspective, self-centered, selfish perspective on the world, and through that, all of these negative emotions crop up. Here are some of the ones that I suffered from. Drinking a lot, doing a lot of drugs, especially drinking a lot, I did some bad things. There's just some things that I did that in my right mind I never would have chosen to do them. I was a very violent, blackout alcoholic. Anything could happen. I was hanging around with some really bad people. And I did some stuff out there that I was really ashamed of. And it haunted me. I lost my family. My wife had to leave the state to be safe. And then when a year later I followed her to where she was living so I could be part of my daughter's life, she had to leave the state again, and she moved halfway across the country just to get away from me, because she knew I loved her, but she also knew that I was an unpredictable, violent drunk. And I probably wouldn't really mean to, but I would kill her some night, So she just got out of town. Now these things happened over and over again. I lost a lot of jobs. I lost a lot of friends. I disappointed a lot of people. When you do that, I don't believe alcoholics are evil people. I believe that we do evil things. We're not evil people. And I don't think we're necessarily stupid, but we do a lot of stupid things. That's part of what happens when you drink alcoholically. But I'll tell you this, I don't think I was bad to the bone. I just had a really wrong perspective of the world. But what I did do is I suffered emotionally from the things that I had done wrong. I felt guilt and shame and remorse at such a deep level. Just overburdened me. I'd be walking down the street and I'd think of something I did and I'd go, oh, it would just like wash over me, this shame. And I had an incredible amount of anxiety. Toward the end of my drinking, it was very difficult for me to leave the house and go do anything without having some booze in me. I couldn't go uptown to shop, without at least having a couple of drinks in me. I just couldn't. I had a complete lack of being able to deal, no dealage. So things were really, really, really bad in that direction. Anxiety. I remember going to the doctor one time, like, doc, I feel really anxious in the morning. I get up in the morning and my heart's beating, I'm nervous, and the noises are really bothering me. I feel really tense. You got anything for that? And the doctor goes, well, it sounds like you have acute anxiety. And he put his little hooter on my heart and listened. And my heart was going, it's because I was detoxing from alcohol, okay? He goes, it sounds like you've got a protracted mitral valve. That's probably causing your anxiety. I'm like, yeah, what do you got for it? And he goes, well, we've got these pills called Xanax. And I go, well, what kind of milligramages? I'm going to need the big ones, you know. So he gives you these Xanaxes, you know, and I quickly know how to go back to him and say, they're not working real well anymore. They're going to need the bigger ones, the bigger ones. And I ended up getting the biggest ones they had, and it got to the point where I was taking them, I wasn't even counting them. I was weighing them in my hand and chasing them with a quart of vodka. Now this is insane, okay? On the pill bottle it says no alcohol, so big, it's bigger than Xanax, you know? And I was washing them down, you know, and within 15 minutes, I'd be like just near comatose, staggering around. And I was doing that to try to treat this anxiety that I had. I just felt uncomfortable. I wasn't comfortable with myself. I wasn't comfortable with my environment. I just, you know, I did. And another aspect of the illness of alcoholism is resentment. Okay? We resent at a whole nother level than anybody else, okay? We move it into the master's class, this resentment. You know, I never forgot something somebody did to me. You know, they did this to me. I would hang on to it for 100 years, you know, and I would be really mad. And I believe that it's normal to get angry. You know, if somebody smashes into your car, you know, recklessly in the parking lot and, you know, gives you the finger, you know, and drives away, I mean, you're going to be angry. There's nothing wrong with being angry. What's bad is trying to hunt that guy down for 10 years, you know, to get him, you know what I mean? And asking everybody you know, everywhere, if they know somebody with a blue pickup truck. I mean, you know, you get obsessed with this type, and that's what resentment is. And resentment is so corrosive to any type of decent life that you have. It ruins all quality of life when you're stuck in that kind of that kind of resentment. I also had a lot of fear. Now, I wouldn't have recognized it as cowardly fear, but it was fear nonetheless, and it was fear of doing things I was going to find uncomfortable. I was afraid to go back to college. I was afraid to ask the boss for a raise. I was afraid to ask a woman that I really liked on a date. I was afraid to do all these things because of an overwhelming fear of rejection. You know, what if they said no? I'd have to go kill myself. You know, I mean, it's this fear. It talks about it in our book. It's an evil and corroding thread. And I had that, and it was tied in with my anxiety, and it was tied in with my resentment, and it was tied in with my guilt, my shame, and remorse. All this emotional stuff that I was caught up with. Now, it was years in Alcoholics Anonymous before I recognized that these emotional states that I've been talking about are alcoholism. That they're manifestations of the illness alcoholism. And the only reason I know that is when I took the treatment for alcoholism, which is the 12-step program of recovery, those emotional states healed. Do I get mad? Yeah. Am I afraid sometimes? Yes. But at a normal level, not at that pronounced, amplified alcoholic level where it's just chewing up your life. So that's aspects, those are aspects of the illness. There's a lot of physical characteristics to alcoholism. If you're alcoholic and you've progressed pretty far, your liver and your pancreas are screwed, okay? They ain't never coming back. What happens with that is they get to a point where they're just not able to process alcohol the way normal people's livers and pancreases process it. And there's this chemical reaction that happens, and it just dumps stuff back into the bloodstream that creates craving and drunkenness and everything. And if you've gone past a certain point with your drinking or your alcoholism, you are never, ever going to drink safely again. You can never, ever drink safely again. And it's because of the deterioration to your liver and pancreas. They do not regenerate an ability to process alcohol normally. Now, a lot of the other things that happen to us, here's something that's a little scary too. Medical doctors. I'm sure you've heard in AA meetings, just tell your doctor you're alcoholic before he prescribes something. You know, that's all you need to do. Okay, let me tell you something. There are some great physicians out there that really understand alcoholism and really understand addictive illness. Okay, they're specialists in it. Most of these other doctors wouldn't know what alcoholism or drug addiction is if it hit them with a 2x4. Do you know how much studying they need to do to get their medical license on alcoholism or addiction? 2 hours, okay? And then 2 additional hours. And most of those hours are on cirrhosis conditions, okay? Esophageal varices. They're on the real acute symptoms that they may need to treat you for if you show up in the emergency room. They don't know anything about the phenomenon of craving. They don't know anything about not prescribing you the wrong stuff. They don't know, and most of them don't care, you know. But what happens is that misunderstanding about alcoholism, it permeates society. This is the most misunderstood illness. There's stigma, there's discrimination, there's misunderstanding. You can't count on the medical doctors to know what to do with you. It's really, really bad. It's a very unorthodox illness. The treatment is very unorthodox. The treatment happens in church basements. That's very, very hard for some people to process. I'll tell you a story about my first month in AA. I'd been drinking myself out of one job after the other. Finally, I go to AA. This is before I really got sober. And, you know, I'm telling everybody, I'm in AA, you know, and I'm not drinking. And, you know, and this one guy comes up to me and he goes, well, what's this AA stuff all about? How does that help you not drink? And I remember saying to him, well, you know, I'll tell you about a meeting. You know, we all go down into a church basement and you grab a cup of coffee and then you take a seat and then they say a prayer and then, you know, someone has a resentment and they raise their hand and they talk about their resentment and somebody else has a resentment. They talk about their resentment. They pass the basket around and at the end we all form in a big circle. We all hold hands and say the Lord's Prayer. And this guy's looking at me like I'm completely nuts. And I'm thinking, he's right. You know, this doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about that out there. Alcoholism is a spiritual illness. It's a physical illness. It's a mental illness. It's devastating across the board. If you have it, your chances are less than average. If you come in here and participate and thoroughly follow the path, your chances are really, really good. What do you need to be convinced of that? Because whatever it is, you need to find it. That's all I got. Thanks.